Have you ever felt like you were wearing a mask that didn't quite fit? Maybe you're at a party, forcing a smile while your internal battery is screaming at 1%, wishing you were home with a book. Or perhaps you're the one who can't sit still, wondering why everyone else seems so content just doing nothing. For thousands of years, we've looked into the mirror and asked the same haunting question: who am I, really? We've tried to find the answer in these stars in our blood types or in cryptic ink blots on a clinical wall. We have this desperate, aching need to be categorized, to feel like our quirks aren't just random glitches in the matrix. We want to know if our anxiety, our ambition, or our kindness is part of a larger design. But for most of human history, personality was a ghost, something we could feel, but never truly measure. That changed when a group of obsessed scientists decided to stop guessing and start counting. They didn't look at the stars. They looked at the very words we use to describe each other. What they found wasn't just a list of traits, but a map of the human soul that governs almost everything you do. Before we had data, we had metaphors. The earliest attempt to map your personality dates back to ancient Greece and a concept called the four humors. Hippocrates and later Galen believed that your character was dictated by the balance of bodily fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. If you were sanguine, you were cheerful because you had plenty of blood. If you were melancholic, you were sad due to an excess of black bile. While this sounds like primitive medicine, it was actually the birth of trait theory. It was the first time humans moved away from demons or fate and looked for internal, stable biological causes for behavior. Eventually, the fluids were debunked, but the idea of types remained. The belief that humans could be grouped into rigid, unchanging boxes. The problem with types is that they're too binary. You're either an extrovert or an introvert with no room for the messy middle. Modern psychology realized that personality isn't a box you sit in, it's a set of sliding scales. This shift from what type are you to how much of this trait do you have changed everything. It turned personality from a mystery into a spectrum that we could actually calculate. Imagine a man sitting in a quiet study in 1884, surrounded by dictionaries and a mountain of scratch paper. His name was Francis Galton, and he was obsessed with one specific radical idea. He believed that if a human trait was important enough, we would have invented a word for it. Think about that for a second. Every nuance of your character, every shadow of your temperament has been named by someone somewhere. Galton wasn't interested in ink blots or dreams. He was interested in the collective wisdom of the English language. He started combing through the dictionary, hunting for every single adjective that described a person's stable character. He called this the lexical hypothesis. It was the first time someone suggested that the map of the human soul wasn't hidden in the stars or the brain, but in our vocabulary. He spent years counting, sorting, and obsessing over the words we use to gossip, to praise, and to condemn. He knew that if he could just find the right words, he could finally calculate the essence of who we are. Galton's idea was brilliant, but it was massive, too big for one man to finish. In the 1930s, two psychologists named Gordon Allport and Henry Odbert decided to finish what he started. They sat down with the unabridged Webster's Dictionary and manually pulled out every single word that described a person. The final count? 17,953 words. They realized that nearly 18,000 words was an impossible way to understand a human being. To make sense of it, they had to separate temporary states from permanent traits. Angry is a state, It's how you feel right now because someone cut you off in traffic. Irritable is a trait. It's your tendency to get angry more easily than the average person. Allport and Odbert stripped away the temporary moods and the physical descriptions, leaving a core list of stable characteristics. This was the birth of the trait perspective, the belief that your personality is a system of internal dispositions. These dispositions are relatively stable across time and across different situations. If you are conscientious at school, you are likely conscientious at your first job 10 years later. But even after filtering, they still had thousands of words, far too many for a scientific model. They needed a way to see which words clumped together to find the true pillars of human nature. Imagine the 1940s, a world of heavy machinery, early mainframe computers, and a psychologist named Raymond Cattell. Cattell wasn't content with just a list of words. He wanted to find the periodic table of the human mind. He looked at Allport's list of thousands of adjectives and saw a chaotic mess that needed an architect. He lived in an era before the sleek laptops we have today, using room-sized machines to crunch numbers that would take a human lifetime to calculate by hand. He was obsessed with the idea that if you liked order, you probably also liked punctuality and tidiness. To him, these weren't separate things. They were all branches of the same hidden trunk. He spent decades gathering data from thousands of people looking for the mathematical ghosts in the machine. He wanted to prove that your personality isn't a random collection of habits, but a structured, logical system. It was a cold, calculated approach to the most human thing imaginable. And it led him to a number that would change psychology forever: 16. To understand how Cattell narrowed thousands of words down to 16 and eventually 5, you have to understand a mathematical superpower called factor analysis. Imagine you're looking at a giant bowl of fruit salad. From a distance, it looks like 1,000 different pieces of food. But if you look closer, you realize everything in that bowl comes from just 5 or 6 actual fruits: apples, grapes, melons, and so on. Factor analysis is the statistical sieve that finds the hidden patterns in the noise. If a person scores high on orderly, thrifty, and punctual, those 3 things are almost always linked. In statistics, we say they covary. Because they move together, we can assume there is a single latent trait underneath them that we can't see directly. Cattell called these source traits, the deep, underlying roots of your behavior. His 16PF model was a massive leap forward. But as computers got faster and data got cleaner, other researchers noticed something. Cattell's 16 traits were still overlapping too much. By the 1980s, researchers like Costa and McRae realized that if you ran the math even further, those 16 clusters collapsed into 5 giant pillars. These are the Big Five, the universal coordinates of human personality. No matter what culture you're from or what language you speak, these 5 dimensions show up every single time. Imagine walking into a job interview, and before you even speak, the interviewer already knows how you'll perform. They don't need a crystal ball. They just need your coordinates. In the 1980s and 90s, psychologists realized that personality wasn't just a fun parlor trick. It wasn't a way to categorize your friends. It was a predictor of destiny. They began tracking thousands of people from childhood into their 80s, watching how their traits played out. They saw that the kid who couldn't sit still in 3rd grade often became the adult who thrived in high-pressure sales. They noticed that the person who was meticulously organized with their homework lived, on average, several years longer. Personality shifted from being a theory to being a biological reality, as stable as your height and as influential as your IQ. We stopped seeing people as good or bad and started seeing them as sets of survival strategies. Because every trait, no matter how frustrating it feels, exists because it helped our ancestors survive. Today, we use the acronym O.C.E.A.N to remember these 5 universal pillars. First is openness to experience, your intellectual curiosity and creative imagination. High scorers love abstract ideas. Low scorers prefer the concrete, the practical, and the way things have always been done. Next is conscientiousness. This is your internal project manager. It's the trait of self-discipline, order, and dutifulness, the single best predictor of career success and longevity. Then we have extroversion, which isn't just being talkative, but rather your sensitivity to rewards and social stimulation. Fourth is agreeableness, your tendency to prioritize social harmony over your own self-interest. High scorers are empathetic and cooperative. Low scorers are competitive, skeptical, and often more difficult to work with. Finally, there is neuroticism, your alarm system for physical and social threats. If you score high, your brain is hyper-vigilant, scanning for what might go wrong. If you're low, you are emotionally resilient and calm under pressure. These 5 scales don't tell you who you are in a vacuum, they tell you how you interact with the world. They are remarkably stable. If you are high in openness at 20, you will likely be high in openness at 70. Understanding these isn't about putting yourself in a box. It's about knowing which settings your brain came with from the factory. I want you to think about the last time you felt out of place. Maybe you felt lazy because you couldn't focus, or rude because you didn't want to chat. When we understand trait theory, that self-judgment starts to melt away. You realize you aren't broken. You just have a specific set of coordinates on a map that billions of others share. Knowing your traits is the ultimate form of self-defense. It allows you to stop fighting against your nature and start building a life that actually fits who you are. You can't change your height, and you likely won't change your core traits, but you can change the environment you put them in. The dictionary gave us the words, the math gave us the pillars, but only you can decide what to do with the map.